Welcome to the Optimal Life Podcast. My name is Elliot Barnett, and I'm excited for you to be here with me today to learn to help others or help yourself live an optimal life. Well, I am excited for today's episode. The reason I'm excited is because I'm going to be talking about predictive coding. So, what's predictive coding and why am I excited about it? This is one of those stories of research that this happened to a lot of research scientists in the past, that you're researching something and there you discover other research that really it not only enhances and supports what you're doing, but ties everything together. And this is that story for me and cognitive response therapy. Cognitive response therapy was born out of my desire to answer some pretty fundamental questions that I talked about in previous episodes. If so many people are taking medication and seeking therapy and partaking in therapy, then why don't the statistics reflect the improvements? People are still struggling tremendously. And so if the mental health industry is being effective in helping people, really helping people, then why don't the statistics reflect that? So that started my journey. That started my journey when I was in my 20s, and the decade-ish journey of the original 3 research studies that culminated in 2015 and produced the original version of cognitive response therapy. And at the time, I had some really good foundational concepts, and I'll talk a little bit about those today, that I saw working in the research studies with the research study participants, but it left some questions, and I didn't actually fully understand what even the questions were, never mind the answers. But until I came across this research around predictive coding and how the brain is a prediction machine, this is when it all came together for me. And it's very exciting to share a little bit of that history and how this research really elevated cognitive response therapy to an entirely new level. And after this discussion, you will truly understand why this is the key unlock that we've been looking for in the mental health industry. This is why I'm so excited about empowering people to be agents of change in the new era of mental health, because we finally have remember, it's all about the affordability, the accessibility, and the effectiveness of mental health, of the mental health industry. And what we want to address is, of course, affordability and accessibility, but also the effectiveness, and empowering people through the certification programs at elliottbarnett.com in CRT and the ARRATE framework. It really helps people to help others more effectively. And so addressing that third component of being effective in empowering people to live their optimal life. So you'll understand why this research specifically tied a lot of things together in the original research studies and allowed me in recent years to elevate cognitive response therapy to where it is. So let's talk a little bit about that. Let's talk about predictive coding. Let's talk about the original research studies. I have a few notes here that I want to make sure. I'm not going to go into excruciating detail about the research studies. They're all available online, but I do want to touch on the basic principles. So the original research study that I came across was the Friston et al. 2009 study, the free energy principle. And this to me was absolutely that moment that everything clicked for me. I could not believe how this pulled everything together for me. And the reason that it was such a big moment was because the research studies, the original research study was around, of course, as you guys have probably heard in previous episodes. If you haven't, I'd encourage you to go back to I think it was a second episode that I talked about the research studies. But the original research study was around overcoming the introspection illusion. So that's the cognitive bias that we just don't know ourselves all that well. It's certainly not enough to make the true lasting changes that we need to make in our lives. So the first step on a therapeutic journey really needs to empower somebody to be introduced to themselves for the first time, truly and thoroughly. So I developed a therapeutic asset called the Language Association and Categorization System, or the LACS. And it was an intellectual property that helped mental health practitioners or coaches really use language, self-reporting language through categorizations and associations to overcome that introspection illusion, give the person a little bit more clarity about who they really are. The second research study was around these inner disconnects, or what I call core disharmony. So we're not really showing up in the world consistently, which is understandable for the most part, but the challenge becomes when we're trying to misrepresent ourselves. We want somebody to think of ourselves in a certain way or perceive or receive us in certain ways, and it's not really who we truly are. And that in the research study was shown to cause a stress response, which of course impacts both mental and physical health, and of course those are inextricably tied. But the third research study is where the focus of this episode is, which is when I started to think about how does a psychological structure, meaning the essence of who somebody is, how is that formed? And this was where the concept of the mental core came from. And I thought about and the mental core is just sort of a way to conceptualize and categorize the aspects of who we are. So I have the concept of a core constitution, which is the person's beliefs and values, what they hold themselves and others to. The concept of core attributes, which are positive aspects of who we are. You might be empathetic, compassionate, intelligent, all these great attributes. Of course, there are viruses, which are these concepts of these negative drivers within ourselves. You might be prone to jealous responses in certain situations, or respond angrily to disrespect or something like this. So these are just conceptualizations of who we are and the essence of who we are, kind of similar to the physical core being the center of the physical strength, stability, and balance for somebody. The mental core is the center of their mental strength, stability, and balance. But the question became, where did the mental core come from? How does it manifest? How does it come to be? And when I really thought about how somebody evolves from birth on, they really are thrown into this world. We don't choose our socioeconomic situations. We don't choose our family, of course. We don't choose a lot of our early circumstances. But of course, those early circumstances certainly influence who we eventually become. And I thought of this in terms of memory, because what essentially happens is you have this new infant in the world. They're responding to the world is responding back. They then respond, the world responds back. They cry in their crib, somebody comes to console them, or they don't. That's a very different experience for that child. So I had this original concept of a response pattern, these patterns of responses to the world, and the world responds back. And over time, those response patterns, and you can think of those as memories, really, that's really what is driving future formations of expectations. As you build memories of these patterns, you start to expect certain things from the world. If I do certain things, I expect a certain result or a certain response back. But that's really the seat of what eventually becomes what I call the core constitution, those beliefs and values. And ultimately, that drives what we call our principles. Principles are just if-then statements. They're really, if this happens, this is what I do. If this is the situation, this is how I respond to that situation. So they're really just memories. So this was the root of the concept of a response pattern. But eventually over time, what I realized is that's really what the habitual cycles that we live in. Because most of our life is just driven by our past, so what we remember from, what are pulled from our memories. So what these response patterns turn into are really response cycles. So the original research, the third research study that pulled the first two together and really became the therapeutic approach for cognitive response therapy was rooted in response cycles. And the idea that that there's this response to the world, a response back, and that response back is fed back into and influences and shapes the mental core. So if you're responding in an angrily way, that could reinforce the virus within the mental core. If you're responding compassionately or based on your core constitution in some meaningful way, then the response back would feed back and reinforce those aspects of your mental core. So I had this concept of a response cycle, and the eventual therapeutic goal was to influence and mindfully intervene in the response cycles, the negative response cycles that somebody was following in their life, and influence it in a positive direction, of course, reinforcing the positive aspects of their mental core and not reinforcing the negative aspects of their mental core. So that is really the culmination of cognitive response therapy and the therapeutic journey that a mental health professional or a coach that is trained in cognitive response therapy, that's where they would end up. And that was really the basis for cognitive response therapy in the original programs like mental fitness training that I launched somewhere around 2016, 17, and the original platform of My Core Insights back in 2019. So all of this was impactful. The research studies were clear. I was starting to really empower people towards living their optimal life. I was seeing a lot of success. It was moving along well. But somewhere around that time, around 2020, 2021, I came across this research study, Friston et al., from 2009. And this, my friends, was the eye-opener for me. This really helped me to understand what those response cycles really were and the neurological underpinnings of the science behind what I had already discovered early on. This is what was so fascinating to me, is that I had essentially demonstrated a therapeutic approach and the impact of the original research that was done in 2009. I had demonstrated results of that because to date there had not been any efforts of translating this type of free energy principle and predictive coding into a therapeutic approach. And I had, not knowingly, already kind of integrated principles of this into cognitive response therapy. But once I actually found this research and read it, I was like, oh my, this is exactly what I've been looking for to tie it all together. And that's why you don't see response cycles in the literature for me anymore. I've changed it to predictive response cycles because that's where we evolved to. So what does it say? It says that, and there was follow-on studies too, and I'll touch on those as well. But the original research study basically said that it's an active inference system. So our brain is this active inference system. It's not passive. It's actually, it's actively participating in modeling the world for us. It's constantly generating predictions about what it expects to perceive and then updating those predictions when reality doesn't align. In other words, the brain's primary job is to minimize surprise. That's that free energy principle, like closing the gap between what it expects and what it experiences. So it's a top-down and bottom-up approach. So higher brain regions continuously generate top-down predictions about what the body should sense or feel, and then the lower sensory regions send bottom-up feedback when reality doesn't match those predictions, or what turns out to be a prediction error. And the whole goal of the brain is to minimize the prediction errors, which is the whole idea of this free energy principle. So the brain then updates the internal model of reality to reduce that error and restore equilibrium. I'll be talking about I actually did talk about it in previous, but I'll be doubling down in future episodes about homeostasis and the body budget concepts. But this is really what that's all about, is the brain is trying to help you survive. And the way to ensure that you survive is to keep you in homeostasis, a baseline energetic state. Expenditure of energy is costly for the body. So we want to minimize that in order for us to survive. At the end of this, we're organisms, just like so many other organisms on the planet, and we want to make and our biological systems are trying to make sure that we survive our next moment. This is not about thriving or some future benefit or success. It's about surviving the moment and making sure that we energetically stay in a balanced state. So that was the research study that helped me to understand this is what I've been talking about. That the brain acts as this prediction machine to minimize this energetic expenditure and to keep us in homeostasis. This had a cascade effect. It had so many implications for me because when I looked at what originally these response cycles, that is exactly what I was talking about. The world, this child responds to the world responds back. The child then responds, the world responds back. It's influencing and shaping this person's mental core, the essence of who they are, what drives them in their life. This research finally pulled it together to help me to understand the neurological underpinnings of the predictive model and the predictive coding and the neurological drive to minimize energy expenditure, which means that it wants us to stay in these normal cycles. Change threatens the system. Anything that's a surprise challenges the system. That's why I did a previous episode on the challenge of change, procrastination, all these topics of trying to become better or change our situations in our lives or improve our lives, even if it's for the better, of course. Our unconscious mind, this neurological underpinning of this free energy principle and the predictive model of the brain says it's going to resist that because that's energetically taxing to our biological system. So it's going to want to say, no. I don't want you to change. I want you to stay exactly who you are. I want you to stay in your normal cycles that you've always followed. If you deviate from that, that threatens our biological system, and that necessarily is bad for us in the moment. Of course, it could be good for you long term, but the unconscious mind and we're just not biologically wired to seek opportunity. We are biologically wired for survival. So that was the original study. There has been many studies after that that I came to understand, like Walsh et al. In 2020. And what this did was, again, map the original study from 2009 that was more theoretical and conceptual into more of a practical neurobiological framing. So they demonstrated the reality of this within the brain to actually show the neurological mechanisms of these top-down predictions and bottom-up feedback. So this brought it to a whole new level and helped, again, me as I came to understand this research study as well, that it was only reinforcing the power of these predictive models and this concept of a predictive response cycle that I built into cognitive response therapy. Because ultimately, it's now demonstrated, if the predictions are generated on our behalf, and I'll talk momentarily about how exactly those predictions are created, if the prediction is generated, which drives our response to the world, and then the response back gets fed back into that prediction machine, that still is our opportunity for therapeutic change, for us to improve our mental health and for mental health professionals and coaches to affect the change in their clients' lives. That is the mindful intervention that's built into the later phases of cognitive response therapy. And in the IRATE framework, in the response management section of the IRATE framework, that's where the heavy lifting is done during the therapeutic journey to heal and strengthen the mental core, so that if you heal and strengthen the mental core, that necessarily means that the predictions that are generated are going to drive better responses. Why? Well, here's how predictions are generated. Predictions are generated based on three elements, and it's supported by the research of Friston in 2009, as well as Walsh in 2020, as well as actually a couple other studies. There was a study in 2023 that demonstrated a lot of this as well. There was Pizzullo in 2022. So a lot of these studies really helped reinforce the cognitive response therapy and what I'm about to tell you. It's really fascinating. So the way that a prediction is generated is first based on the state of the body, what I call the response state of the body. So obviously, we know that we respond differently to life's situations based on our mood. So if we didn't eat well or didn't sleep well, or we're just stressed out, we might not respond so well to a situation. So clearly, the state of our body is going to affect how we show up and respond to life. So that's the first thing. The second part is the environment. Of course, the environmental influences come in through our sense organs. We don't see with our eyes. We don't smell with our nose. These are just collection devices that are served up. All that information is served up to our brain for interpretation and is fed into the next prediction. But the key part of this is not only the response state of the body, and the environment, but our memories. And again, if you think back to what I said at the beginning here, the mental core is a conceptualization of what is represented in our memories. So it's pulling from our experiences of our past, which again are manifested as the different attributes, beliefs, values, and principles that we conceptually represent in our mental core in CRT. So those three pieces together, the state of the body, the environment, and the memories via our mental core, is what is considered, those are what are considered in the generation of a prediction. So then the prediction comes up from our unconscious. How does the prediction show up? It shows up with a change in sensations of the body. So you had a response state that's fed into the initial prediction. Now you become aware of the prediction through a change of those sensations of the body, or what we call our feelings. Now, again, it's very important to understand feelings are not emotions. Those are different. Feelings are the sensations, those changes of sensations of the body. The emotions are the words that we apply to those sensations. Because ultimately, the sensations are just generated by chemical releases of the body. The labels that we apply to those are just us exactly that, labeling or categorizing those changes of sensations and the feelings that we're having within the body. So the prediction makes its appearance to our conscious awareness through the shifts in the feelings, the sensations of the body that we identify as feelings, that we label as emotions, and then the appearance of thoughts. This is the cognitive awareness of this thought stream that comes up, a narrative, a story that shows up, and that really drives our responses to life's situations. So this divide between the internal states and then the influence on those internal states through our actions, actively participating in life's situations. Those actions then get feedback from the environment. Guess what happens? Well, that's again influences the response state of our body. It gets stored and influences in our memories. So the shifts in our mental core, those aspects that we're living through get reinforced, and the ones that we're not living through get kind of deprioritized. And then the environment, again, can change as well. So then we're going to get more input to our next prediction. The prediction then manifests itself through sensational changes of the body and the thoughts and narratives. We then respond to the world. We get a response back. It gets fed back into that prediction machine. That again is our predictive response cycle. The ultimate goal of cognitive response therapy is to identify the negative predictive response cycles that we're experiencing in our lives. We mindfully intervene, understanding that the prediction, generating those sensations and those thoughts, the separation between the prediction making its appearance to our conscious awareness and our actual actions, that is where our opportunity lies. Things are always created twice. Things are created within our bodies through the prediction and then manifest through our actions in the world. So they're created twice. So we have an opportunity between those sensational changes of the body and the appearance of the thoughts and our actions. Again, we don't choose the predictions. We don't choose the results either. We don't choose the sensations of our body. We get to choose how we label those with emotional words and emotional categories, but we do not get to choose the sensational changes of our body. And we also don't choose our thoughts. Our thoughts make their appearance from via the prediction from our unconscious to our conscious awareness. If you could choose your thoughts, you'd have to have the thought before you had the thought. So you don't choose the thought. They just show up. Our opportunity is to mindfully intervene between the appearance of those thoughts and the sensational changes and our actions. That, as a mental health professional or coach, that is your opportunity to guide your clients in a therapeutic journey. And how? Well, this is the whole point of cognitive response therapy. You learn through cognitive response therapy to leverage that language association and categorization system, all of the revelations that the person's had about themselves, overcoming the introspection illusion and really understanding themselves more at a fundamental level. They've also healed and strengthened part of their mental core because they've uncovered those core disharmonies, reduced their overall stress, improved their well-being, which gives them a little bit more room to do this heavy work of identifying what we call cognitive catalysts, which are triggering events that generate negative predictions, which generate negative predictive response cycles, which generate negative responses from the world, which then feed back into the negative predictive response cycle. So we want to make sure that the person is empowered to identify what is triggering those negative predictive response cycles, and how do we counteract those? How do we counteract those? Well, how do we? Well, if it is based on the virus, which is the negative aspects of who we are, of course, we want to leverage the positive aspects. If we have a virus of, say, let's say I respond in an angry way when I'm disrespected, but I also have core attributes of, say, I'm a compassionate person, and maybe I have a belief of to treat people fairly in the world, let's just say. And I've been noticing that there's a trigger within me that generates a negative predictive response cycle. When I'm disrespected, I respond in an angry way. I start to say, well, how can I respond better? I'm going to start leveraging the positive aspects of who I am, the value or the belief that people should be treated fairly, and this core attributes of being compassionate. And I'm going to start responding there. That's where action plans come from. So mindfully intervening and starting to leverage action plans in those situations that we're facing that might trigger negative behaviors, we start to influence those and start to trigger positive behaviors. Positive behaviors, guess what? Get positive results, get fed back into that prediction machine. One thing we have to understand is the unconscious mind is always listening. The unconscious mind is always trying to understand, how do I stay in a baseline? And if your baseline state is rooted in negative predictive response cycles, even if it's not getting you good results in your life as far as success, it's still how you've been living, which means that your unconscious mind is going to resist change. So you're like, hey, I want to improve. I want to become better. I don't want to respond in an angry way. Your unconscious mind says, no, this is how we live. The predictive response cycles say that we're going to continue that cycle and not change, even if you want to, and even if it's for the better, even if it's how you want to live as far as living an optimal life. I'm going to keep you exactly the way that you've been. So it takes mindful intervention in order to move these in the right direction. We have control over two and only two things in our life: how we prepare to respond to life and how we actually respond to life. Let me say that again. We have control over two and only two things in our life: how we prepare to respond to life and how we actually respond to life. Understanding how cognitive response therapy, and specifically predictive response cycles, empower us in our moments is to understand that we can prepare to respond by understanding what those predictive response cycles are and what's really in our mental core that we want to pull from, and then actually responding through practice. None of this is easy, my friend. None of this is easy. It takes a lot of effort and time to be able to make these things happen in our life. Cognitive response therapy, of course, has those 6 phases that you would bring your clients through, and this, what I've been referring to, is really on the latter part of the retraining the unconscious mind to help drive better responses to life's situations. So this is how we're going to change the mental health industry. We are going to focus on making things more effective. And I was excited to share some of these epiphanies with you today, specifically where the idea of predictive response cycles came from and how predictive coding pulled it all together for me. So it was so exciting to come across this research, which was around that 2020, 2021 timeline for me, when I originally found that original 2009 study that helped me to understand what I had done in my research studies that helped people in the formation of the original mental fitness training, which eventually turned into the Rate framework that all of you can get trained in today. What the missing piece was, which was the neurobiological mechanisms that was making the approach so effective for people. Why was it so successful? And I had the evidence to say that it was successful. I just didn't really understand what the neurological mechanisms were. Once I understood this, I said, that is exactly what I've been looking for. And all the follow-on studies, and I'll put those in some of the notes for you guys, So you can look them up, but there's some really great follow-on studies that happened between 2020. There's a 2016 study, as well as a 2020, 2022, and a 2023 study that all kind of reinforced the original 2009 study. So I'll put those in the notes as well. And I really encourage you to head over to elliottbarnett.com. I want you guys to take the journey of the certifications for cognitive response therapy and the RATE framework. And even if you're not prepared to take on clients or build a business, if you get certified, you will be able to help yourself, and eventually you'll be able to help others as well. We wanted to democratize mental health. We wanted to usher in the new era of mental health. It's going to take all of us pulling together. We don't want this to be an ivory tower thing. This is not something that's separated out to say only certain people can help other people. Anybody that's willing to learn cognitive response therapy, the science behind human behavior, this is taking things to a whole new level. The reason that this is so effective, and I hope it's clear now, is because we are addressing the foundational mechanisms, the neurobiological mechanisms that drive people's behavior. Once you understand what those actual mechanisms are and how to influence those mechanisms towards the better, you understand how powerful CRT is as a therapeutic modality to empower people to live their optimal life. I'll see you next time.